Molt bona tarda a tothom. Buenas tardes y bueno, bienvenidos a esta tercera mesa, esta tercera sesión de debate sobre Smart Destinations y Smart Tourism, tecnología, turismo y desarrollo económico local. Confiamos en que seguiremos el nivel y el ritmo de estímulo que hemos recibido en las sesiones anteriores y que podremos en este caso trasladarlo al debate que hoy, y en este caso en esta mesa, centramos alrededor de cuestiones relativas al modelo turístico, partiendo del concepto de las Smart Destinations y centrándonos en la tecnología y el turismo como palancas transformadoras de modelo y como elementos clave de apoyo al desarrollo económico local. Good morning, everyone. Have all welcome to this session that will discuss about models from the smart destinations and focused in technology and tourism as a drivers for the local economic development. The concept of smart destinations is based in 4 pillars. First one, innovation, then technology, accessibility, and sustainability. These are the same 4 lines that inspire the strategic plan and the marketing plan of Catalonia, 2013-2016. Planning then is the first chapter of a Smart Destinations book, and Smart Tourism Administration and Smart DMOs are the key agents to develop this access. In Catalonia, we are boosting the 4 pillars. In innovations, we are orienting look towards demand in all fields, in the product creation, in marketing strategies, in commercialization, and in distribution. In technology, apply it to the whole life cycle, during the inspiration phase, during the booking process, in the travel experience, and in the post-trip phase. In accessibility, improving our offer and promoting Catalonia as a destination for all, emphasizing our 25 destinations recognized as the best practices in accessible tourism, and in sustainability, including environmental, social, and economic sustainability, certifying our commitment with the Biosphere label issued by the Global Sustainable Tourism Council, a member of United Nations Foundation. People often speak about smart destinations thinking just in technology, but it's important to emphasize the other fields: innovation, accessibility, and sustainability. And it's especially important to talk about a responsible tourism model, environmentally sustainable, socially inclusive, and universally accessible. A model, in short, to move towards the goal of achieving better places to visit and better places to live. Today, we will talk not just about smart destinations, not just about technologies and innovation, but about models. Itb Berlin is the main tourism exhibition in Europe and one of the best opportunities for reflection about models. New Zealand, and 100% pure New Zealand, is one of the best positioned tourist brands in the world, a reference for all DMOs and obviously for Catalonia. It's more than a privilege to have today this opportunity. Let me then introduce you Ms. Julian Gabler from Itb. Julian Gabler works with Messe Berlin GmbH since 2003 and specializes in international hospitality and travel technology for tourism. His current responsibilities include developing the conference e-Travel World inside Itb Berlin Convention and program for travel bloggers. She's usual protagonist in the blog Travel Massive. Then, Julian, it's your time. Thank you.
So, buenos dias, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to introduce you today to Itb Berlin. This morning we had already several really great presentations about actual trends and topics in travel and technology, so perhaps I will do a kind of a repetition and at the same time a little bit of wrap up about what you have heard already this morning. So, as I suppose that not everybody of you has attended already Itb, first of all, I would like to give you an idea about what is Itb. Imagine that Itb is for the global travel industry the same as what is the Mobile World Congress here in Barcelona for the mobile industry. So, unfortunately, 10 minutes are much too short to give you a global overview about the current travel technology trends and Itb Berlin at the same time. But I would like I would like to give you at least a very short wrap-up about the following. So, first of all, I will give you a very short introduction about what is ITB Berlin. Afterwards, we will have a look on the e-travel world and what is ITB Convention. And last but not least, we will have a look at the most important trends and topics in travel technology and marketing and distribution. So, let's have a look on some facts and figures from ITB Berlin 2015. ITB Berlin is the biggest travel trade show in the world. Our target market is the worldwide travel industry, and the event is taking place every year in March in Berlin, in Germany. So our exhibition ground has 160,000 square meters. That's just a huge number, but imagine, I think everybody of you knows Camp Nou, the football stadium, so imagine this 25 times, so you have an average idea about the size of ITB Berlin. This year we had over 10,000 exhibitors from 186 countries. During 5 days, we had over 175,000 visitors, including 115,000 trade visitors. So ITB is not all about countries. ITB is also about market segments and the travel value chain. That means that at ITB there are also represented companies like cruises, airlines, travel technology providers, responsible tourism, sustainability, business travel, and so on. So, secondly, let's have a look on ITB Berlin e-travel world. The original title of my speech is ITB e-travel world and future day, digitalización y perspectivas actuales en la industria turística mundial. We chose this title because ITB Travel World and Future Days are the areas where innovation and digitalization at ITB happens. Imagine there are a lot of different ecosystems at ITB. So ITB Travel World is the newest one and perhaps the most dynamic one. It's like a non-traditional way to connect exhibitors, not only with trade visitors, but also with travel bloggers, with online media experts, online travel experts, just in one hall. On the photo here on the slide, you can see the stage of the e-travel world, which is just in the middle of the exhibition. Behind, you can see the booth from TripAdvisor, so that's the concept behind, just to offer a huge meeting point so the interaction is as strong as possible. The conference sessions on stage and in the conference area are part of ITB Berlin Convention. So what is ITB Convention? ITB Convention is the biggest industry conference in the world. This year we had over 23,000 participants during 200 conference sessions in 4 days, which means that in different conference rooms we have up to 6 presentations going on at the same time. So in case you are at ITB, make sure that you choose the right room for the right conference at the right time. Otherwise, your feet were really hurt. So this year, some of the most important topics, and I will just go a little bit into the content, were hospitality, marketing and distribution, sustainable tourism, business travel, and last but not least, travel technology. Nowadays, we have heard this morning already several times, the travel industry is completely technology-driven. Disruptive technologies, new marketing distribution channels, and sharing economies are the buzzwords and very important topics this year. Disruptive technologies are changing the behavior of travelers and suppliers. Mobile and geo-based apps offer new planning and booking possibilities. We have heard this already as well this morning. There's a huge potential for big data, but big data is not automatically smart data, so the travel industry has still to learn how to convert big data into smart data. Distribution and distribution channels are changing. The market is getting more and more fragmented and competitive. At the same time, meta search and consolidation are becoming a threat for OTAs. If travelers trust more and more in social networks review platforms and travel blogs, OTAs and other traditional intermediaries has to change their strategies. If travelers can interact with their peers at every moment of their travel journey, we have heard that just before, brands have to know how to interact with consumers throughout the travel life cycle. I will get back again to the travel life cycle afterwards. Technology-based sharing economy models like Uber or Airbnb are increasingly penetrating the travel industry. I think that all of you are aware of the actual situation with these business models. With Uber and Airbnb, the situation in nearly every city is about the same. By offering consumers far more personalized choice than traditional suppliers, these companies are disrupting and sometimes even disturbing the established business models. So, what does that mean for the tourism industry? Traditional travel suppliers and service providers need to react quickly and innovatively if they want to stop losing market share. So, let's have a look again of the travel life cycle. This time it's a little bit different, but the basic is the same. It is changing and the wheel is turning every time faster and faster. Digital media networks, I prefer this name instead of social networks, which is not exactly the same, have a particularly heavy influence on travel before, during, and after the journey. And the advance of mobile, wearables, and emerging technologies, as you can see above, will increase this trend. So the big challenge is now, is there the right infrastructure to provide and to use this technology in tourism? Ramon Riera this morning, he talked to us about this as well, and he said that one of the actual challenges is the infrastructure. So everybody who is offering new technology for the travel industry should make the reality check. Is there an adequate IT infrastructure? But it's not all about IT. It's not all about Wi-Fi at the destination or in the hotel. The reality check means how connect the technology with the needs of the customers and their reality. On one hand, it's a reality check about suppliers' knowledge. Are the traditional supplier able to integrate the new technology into the existing ones? And are they able to understand that and to explain that to their customers? And on the other side, the customers, are they able to use these new technologies? And is there an added value for them? Because only if there's an added value, they will use them. Otherwise, they are normally not very interested. Looking to the title of the session, Smart Destinations, Smart Tourism, I would say that disruptive technologies are changing not only the destination landscape, but the whole travel industry. Disruptive technologies offer and force all of us to make use of digital innovation. So, to summarize, I would like to close with a quote from Albert Brenner from the Digital Transformation Group. The convergence of social, local, and mobile technology and content will be the next transformation step for the travel industry, even it will be just one step. Thank you for your attention, and please have a look on our website and let me know if you want to know more about ITB. There are several presentations from this year ITB Convention available on our YouTube channel. Y si hay alguna pregunta en español, también estaré disponible de responderles en castellano. Muchísimas gracias y see you hopefully at ITB next year in Berlin.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Julian. Thank you for your presentation. And now let me introduce you to Professor Simon Milne. Professor Milne is the Professor of Tourism of the Auckland University of Technology and Director of the New Zealand Tourism Research Institute that recently has focused on better understanding the links between information technology, tourism, and local economic development. He has considerable international experience in local and regional economic development, tourism strategy, having conducted tourism research in the 5 continents. Professor Milne has worked as a research consultant for a range of New Zealand and international organizations, including the United Nations Development Programme, UNESCAP, the World Tourism Organization, the European Union, Luxembourg Development, CIDA, the Chilean Regional Development Agency, and the Organization for American States. Thank you, Professor Simon Milne. It's your time.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today, and a pleasure to be able to talk a little bit about the place that I call home, which is obviously New Zealand. I'm not sure how many people here have been to New Zealand for a holiday or a visit. Okay, obviously I have a bit of marketing to do today, get a few more people to come. I want to tell you a story, really. I want to tell you a story about New Zealand's success as a tourism destination and the way in which we've built and developed a very strong brand. But I also want to tell you a little bit about some of the challenges that we face at the moment. And I want to talk about how we're trying to address those challenges by getting local and slowing the visitor down. And I hope there'll be some themes and some ideas and thoughts that may be of relevance to you wherever you may come from. So as mentioned, I'm based in New Zealand, but the institute that I direct has done work in many parts of the world. This is just a diagram that shows the areas that we've worked in the last 15 years. And wherever we work, I think it's fair to say that we see some common global challenges with tourism. We're always, wherever we are, trying to capture the visitor, trying to bring them to our place, to attract them from other places. We're trying to sustain the resources upon which tourism depends, the physical environment, the cultural resources which are so important to tourism development. We're trying to improve quality of life. We're trying to give the hosts and the residents in these places some reason to support tourism. It's an old saying, but it's a good one. If tourism works for communities, then communities will work for tourism. If the quality of life of communities is diminished, they'll be less responsive to and less willing to work for tourism. We're trying to raise awareness of the industry also around the world. I think wherever we go, there's a desire to make sure that politicians are more aware of the importance of tourism. There's also a desire to make the young people of today, who are the citizens and the workers of tomorrow, more aware of the importance of the industry. And I think the bottom line is wherever we look, there's a desire to increase visitor yield. If we can get the visitor to spend more money, we don't have to have so many visitors, and that can help us create a more sustainable industry. So really there's a close link that I want to explore today between increasing visitor yield, which is at the heart of the New Zealand tourism strategy, and also building community development, because communities are at the heart of our tourism industry and at the heart of the tourism experience. So, as you know, we're a small nation and we're very much on the periphery of the world. It takes around 25 hours to fly from New Zealand to Europe. So it's a long journey, and despite that long journey and despite the fact that we're on the periphery, we have done, I think, quite well over the last 15 years promoting ourselves and branding ourselves as a place that tourists should come to. And in fact, there's just been some recent research released in the last week that shows that the Chinese consumer now ranks New Zealand as their #1 destination to travel to in the Asia-Pacific region. So our branding of the country as 100% pure has been a successful approach. And in fact, when we look at the country brand index reports, you can see that in 2011 and 12, New Zealand was ranked #3. Just recently, the most recent, we've dropped down to #5, but we're still doing very well for a small country. We're punching above our weight as a tourism industry. And that effective branding has done a lot to help us grow our visitor numbers. And you can see from the diagram here that numbers have grown from only 100,000 visitors in 1965 through to nearly 3 million visitors today. And we have a population of just over 4 million in our country. So the numbers have been growing. There have been some ups and downs, but we've seen consistent growth over this period of time. And we've also seen growth in a number of key markets growth in spend and in visitor numbers from Australia, which has always been our largest market, an increasing number in recent years coming from China. China is now our second largest tourism market. And we've managed to also consistently maintain numbers from our long-haul markets in Europe, the United States and elsewhere. However, we do face some serious challenges. While our numbers have been growing, and while our overall visitor spend has been growing slowly, the spend per visitor, which is this red line here, has actually been dropping. Year on year for the last decade or so, the amount that each visitor spends when they come to New Zealand has been declining. The yield per visitor has been dropping. And that's a concern for us. We don't want to be in a situation where we are bringing in more and more visitors just to keep the economic benefits of tourism where they are. We want to be getting more impact, more yield from each visitor. We want to be able to grow our industry without having to attract millions of more tourists. Because if we do that, it's going to be harder to sustain the environmental and cultural resource base upon which the industry survives and depends. That challenge, that problem of yield is shown also when we look at a national level, when we see that tourism's role as a proportion of our gross domestic product has fallen steadily over the last 10 years, from around about 5% down to around about 3.5%. So while we are, I think we're very correct to trumpet the value of our brand and to talk about the fact that we've done a very good job internationally, we have this ongoing challenge of how do we build visitor yield. Why has that yield been falling? Well, we know that one of the challenges that we face is the rising value of the New Zealand dollar, and you can see against the US dollar it's almost doubled in the last few years. It's not something we can control greatly, but it's a factor in the mix. Some of you may also be aware that in the last few years we've had some major earthquakes in New Zealand. They've killed 300 people, but they've also damaged the South Island's tourism industry considerably. The earthquake in Christchurch destroyed 50% of its accommodation stock. That's also created a slowdown in some parts of our industry. It's also had an impact on our ability to build visitor yield. The growth in the Chinese market has been very strong for us. It's a positive thing, but the Chinese visitor doesn't stay as long. They don't spend as much money. And in fact, for us, one of our key strategic goals is how do we start to build the free and independent traveller from China? How do we move away from the package traveller to those travellers that are going to explore the country more and spend a little bit more money along the way? So the changing market mix of our tourism industry has also had, I think, some impact on that lower yield per visitor. The problem of yield has actually been the focus for the last few years and has come to the fore in our new New Zealand tourism strategy, which was just released in the last year. That tourism strategy takes us through to the year 2025. And you can see from this figure here that the focus is not on building visitor numbers, it's on building total tourism revenue, and in particular on building yield per visitor. To achieve that goal of $41 billion by the year 2025, we have a long way to go. Currently, we're generating about $28 billion. So we're going to have to increase that yield considerably to hit our goals. That means an increase in visitor numbers, but an even faster increase in the spend per person. How do we do that? What are some of the things that we're trying to achieve to get to that higher yield? And what role does information and communication technology play in that? At a national level, our marketing focus has been on what we call the interactive traveller. An interactive traveller doesn't mean someone who wears a hat, as is in this case. What it means is someone who is actually using technology to plan their travel, using technology to talk about their travel afterwards, people that are interested in authentic travel experiences, people that will one day go bungee jumping and do something adventurous, but on the next day are quite happy to lie and relax in a 5-star hotel and eat wonderful food. It's all about trying to bring experienced travellers to our country and to, again, try and build yield through this particular market, which could be coming from the US, from the UK, from Australia. It doesn't really matter where, we just want the increasingly high-yield interactive traveller to come to our country. Part of that focus of building yield is to develop new product and new marketing campaigns as well. One of our new product developments is to create cycle trails, which will allow cyclists to move from the very north of our islands right down to the very south. And in doing so, they have a chance to interact with and get involved with the local economies along the way. We're trying to focus very much on encouraging those Chinese travellers that are an increasingly large part of our market to also take the time to interact and connect with the economies around them, to drive cars themselves, to go on the cycle routes, not to rely purely on packages and on bus travel around the country. And of course, in terms of marketing, we've been able to build on the success of movies like Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. How many of you have seen Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit? Okay, a lot more than have been to New Zealand itself. But you can see here that this whole focus on the Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit has been used very much as a tourism, branding and tourism development activity. We've got tours, we've got activities which bring people to relive those movies that they've seen, to walk in the steps of Gandalf the Wizard and the Hobbit. It's all part of our attempt to, again, build visitor numbers and also, in the long term, build visitor yield. I think these are nice ideas, and I think our strategy is doing some very good things, but I'm afraid to say that I don't believe that these approaches are what are going to solve the long-term problem of increasing visitor spend. Tourism yield has to be driven by other things, and it really relies on, I believe, the visitor having greater interaction with and connection to community. And I believe that community themselves have a very important role to play in building visitor yield. Visitor yield, we know, is driven by and can be enhanced by improving the visitor experience. Our research in New Zealand shows that visitor experience is most readily increased through interaction with community. Community involvement in talking to visitors and in sharing with visitors their experiences, getting them to link to local economies. But we know that in the long term, this can only work if that yield also comes back to the community. We know that if tourism degrades the resources upon which community depends, if people feel overwhelmed by tourist numbers, if they are losing their quality of life, that tourism yield won't grow because the community won't welcome those visitors and the visitors will be eventually feeling like they've been turned away. The challenge really is, I believe, to actually enhance the community involvement in tourism through information and communication technology. I was listening as best as I could because I don't really understand a lot of what was said this morning, but certainly I could read from the slides that we've got a big focus here on robotics and we've got a big focus on social media and new technologies, and that's absolutely fantastic. It's really the future of tourism. But I would say that we must keep the idea of community at the heart of what we talk about when we're trying to develop and enhance tourism. And when we talk about information technology in tourism, we need to think beyond marketing and reaching the visitor to how we actually engage community and build the capacity of community to interact. It's fine to have an interactive tourist, but unless there is also an interactive community to engage with them, we are not going to see yield increase in a sustainable way. And that's important because when we talk about national yield and we talk about national revenue, that all comes from people spending a little bit more money in that local shop, an extra $1 or $2 in the local bakery, an extra few hours as they wander through a local community. That's what really counts in the long run. Every drop, every dollar that is spent is what eventually builds our overall revenue and our overall success of the industry. So we must always think about the local when we're discussing those national dimensions. And from my perspective, this is really where the message starts. We have to enable the interactive traveller to interact with our local economies. We have to support community in their attempts to build and link to the tourism industry. And that's all about slowing the visitor down. This is a sign which sits just outside Auckland City on one of the islands in our harbour. And as soon as you get off the ferry and you start walking or driving onto the island, this is the sign you see. Slow down, you are here. Take the time to engage with us, and we will take the time to engage with you. Now, there are traditional ways that communities have slowed visitors down. One of those is to put some toilets into a public accessible area. But we all know that a toilet only slows you down so much. You can develop the toilet experience. You can put in all sorts of new technology, but still it's a toilet. Of course, communities have taken other approaches as well. We have information centres where, again, you're encouraging visitors to gather knowledge about what surrounds them, to spend some time in that information centre, interacting with maybe the local guides. And that's another way to build that link to the local economy and to slow the visitor down. But of course, as we all know, the most significant approach that we can take is to give visitors information about what they can see and experience before they arrive, to make sure that there's plenty of online information once they are in that community so that they can look at it with their smartphones, their tablets, etc. And we also need to make sure that the tourists can talk about their experience and be our ambassadors once they leave through their blogging, their social media interaction, etc. What I want to talk about now is the approach that we are taking to try and build visitor yield by getting local. By not just giving the visitor more local experiences, but by giving the community the tools and the approaches to link more effectively to tourism. I like to think of this as C2T, or community to tourist development. That's really what this is all about, because we can't have an interactive tourist unless there is also an interactive community. And this slide just really sums up what we mean by the get local approach. We want to slow that visitor down. We want to give them a reason to spend more money. We want to do that by giving the visitor and the community a sense of place. What makes this place unique? What makes this community special? We need to involve not just businesses and tour operators, but residents and community groups, schools and other groups within that community to help create that sense of place, and to also build an understanding within those groups of what makes them special and what makes them unique. And we want to place information and communication technology and also community informatics at the centre of this Get Local strategy. I now just want to give you an example of how the Get Local strategy works, the kinds of tools and techniques that we use. This is obviously from a New Zealand perspective, but we do this work in many other parts of the world as well. Every context is different, every approach that you adopt has to be different, but I think there are some core ideas and themes here that will resonate for you here in Barcelona and elsewhere. I'm going to use some examples from Auckland, the city that I live in, which has a population of around about 1.5 million people. I'm also going to use some examples from the rural area of the South Island, the very bottom of our South Island, called Western Southland. A group of communities in a region that has been trying to slow visitors down as they travel on this route called the Southern Scenic route that links Queenstown, our major winter resort, to Dunedin, one of our largest southern cities. People have been driving around this route and they have not been slowing down. They have not been stopping in Western Southland. We're finding ways through this model to encourage that slowing down, to encourage those linkages. Now, there are a series of phases that we can look at as we develop a get local approach. Not every community will adopt all of these phases. Some will come in at a certain time. Some will ignore some phases and jump straight to a later phase. But I just want to talk through in a very systematic way the kind of approach that we take to help build an interactive community, to help build the capacity of a community to use information technology to engage more with the interactive tourist. The first step that we use is a very simple one. We simply audit and look at what is online about your community at the moment. Are you well represented or are you invisible online? And the resources that you do have online, are they something that you have had some say in, or are they being created by outsiders? Is the message that's being presented about your community a unique message, something that creates a sense of place, or is it generic and has it been created by someone from a marketing or web development firm who doesn't really understand who you are as a community? This audit is a very powerful tool to help people understand where they presently are, but it's also a very powerful tool to motivate community to take their own steps to tell their stories and to have them represented to the visitor. Seeing stories and getting ideas from this audit as a community member that makes you feel that you're not being well represented or accurately represented is something that forces you to take action. So it's a very important first step. And we look at that from a global scale right down to the local scale. What kind of information is being presented? How well is that information presented online? Are you just selling beds, or are you linking your accommodation to other sectors of the economy? Does your culture, do your natural resources shine through to the visitor before they arrive and when they are actually in place? So we're not just talking about marketing the product, we're talking about marketing the sense of place. We're trying to create a unique sense of place for these communities. And very often what we find is communities are quite shocked when they see how they are represented online to the overseas visitor. They're quite shocked to see the kinds of comments and feedback that are being presented by visitors through social media. This is our way to engage and get communities to think more deeply about how their voice can be heard and how that can begin to stimulate economic development and yield. The second phase that we adopt is to gather a group of people from that community, not just tourism stakeholders, but a range of individuals, to begin to work as champions, to begin to train and mentor other members of the community so that they can start to play an active role in building resources, so that they can actually start to play a role in engaging with the tourist. And the key message here is that these community members are not just tourism business owners. They may be the local school teacher, they may be the local gas station owner, they may be people who are somewhat peripheral to the direct impacts of tourism, but we're trying to drive home the message that tourism is everyone's business. The negative and positive impacts of tourism affect everyone. A decline in visitor yield affects everyone. A sense that you are being overcrowded as locals affects everyone. We need to make sure that those visitors that are coming to that community are hearing the message of the community if they are going to interact effectively with the local economy. And I think one of the first lessons that we always learn from this work is that very often when a community tries to go out there and present itself to the tourist, the very first thing they want to do is have a brand. The challenge is that if you start to build a brand too early, and if you start to present a brand too early, that can actually create a lot of tension within community. Not everyone is going to agree with that particular statement or that particular one word that's put out there. And in fact, we see that with our New Zealand brand at the moment. 100% Pure New Zealand is a great brand. But are we really 100% pure as a country? Environmentally, are we living up to the expectations that are created by that brand? Many of our tourists don't believe that once they actually come to our country. So for a community, the first step is not always to have a brand. The first step is actually to work together and to see what your unique sense of place is and how you can collaborate and work together to achieve that sense of place and to let a brand emerge organically. The next step we talk about with these communities is about gathering data and information about who is coming to this location, how your industry is working, how effectively they network together, and also how your community feels about tourism and the way that it's been developing. This is gathering data, but it's not big data. It's actually what I would call small data. When we look at big data, and New Zealand is very good at capturing and generating good big data on our tourist industry, it's fantastic, but it's very difficult to translate that into meaningful information for local communities. Local communities do not always find the fine-grained information that they need to make good decisions. So phase 3 for us is about building decision support systems for communities. It doesn't ignore the big data, and certainly the big data is very valuable in helping set the broader context. But we need to understand what is happening at that local scale through the collection of small data. And in the regions and in the communities we work with, we use online survey techniques. We use the simple gathering of data that's already been collected by individual businesses to start to draw a bit of a picture for what is happening to the tourism industry in this location. And to get a feel for what is the local yield of the industry. If we can understand that, we can also measure the performance of that local industry over time. So small data is very valuable to small places. In the case of Auckland, I'm just looking at one example here, an area called Puhoi to Pakari, which is a region just north of our downtown area. We can gather data that looks at visitor flows. Where are people going to within this region? Where do they actually go to within a particular community setting? How can we begin to shift some of those flows to perhaps reduce some of the tensions that exist around overcrowding? Or to perhaps increase some of the yield that is being missed out from certain localities? How can we actually understand from the community what they feel are the negative impacts of tourists coming to their place? It's important to think about growing yield, it's important to think about marketing tourism, but it's also important to think about how this impacts upon communities. We know that, but research can play a role in this as well. In the same way that we want to measure changing visitor spend and changing visitor satisfaction, we need to do the same for communities as well. And if we can begin to highlight the fact that things like traffic congestion, things like overcrowding are a problem, we can start to address these issues. Now, this is our equivalent of overcrowding in New Zealand. I think it's quite different when you look at parts of Old Town Barcelona, for example, where you've got crowds and crowds of people. For us, crowding is very often around transport, cars blocking roads, local community feeling like they can't get access to their facilities because tourist numbers are growing. And very often what our research shows is not just that the community sees these as negative issues, but also the tourist. So in the same location, we've asked the same question to visitors and they're giving us the same answer. We are feeling overcrowded. There are places in this destination, in this community, where we feel we can't travel easily. Those are the hotspots. Those are the tension areas that we need to plan for and develop further so that we don't see a degradation in visitor and local experience. And information and communication technology is central to us gathering that data through online survey techniques and through other tools, using smartphone apps to again gather information on where people are travelling to and what their satisfaction is with that travel experience. So I can't reinforce enough that small data is just as important when it comes to building visitor yield at a local scale as large data. The next step, once you've worked with community to understand how they're represented online, once you've started to get an understanding of what tourism means economically and how community relates to tourism, how they feel about tourism, is to begin to build experiences that can connect the visitor to the local economy. And those experiences can be developed through trails, they can be developed through networks of businesses. That group of people that have been involved in the web audit and are starting to be the champions of community in terms of a tourism sense, they can be very active in beginning to drive this development of networks and trails. We can use all sorts of tools and all sorts of mechanisms to gather from the bottom up, from the grassroots, the kinds of stories and information that make up the rich fabric that create a visitor experience. So these are some examples from that same area: vineyards, local food producers, schools, arts and crafts activities, all starting to have their voice heard. Also stories about local beaches, local physical landscapes, which have got indigenous people, Maori people, stories have existed about these places for centuries. How do we share those stories with the visitor? How do we make that come alive, the landscape, the culture for the visitor? That's what slows the visitor down. Now, in the case of this region, this information now is layered into a very effective website. A website that talks about the range of activities for the visitor, but is also a resource for the local population. Just like the best museums and the best waterfront developments around the world work for locals as well as visitors, we believe that the best community and regional marketing, tourism marketing sites also work best if they're giving something for the community as well. These sites aren't just about marketing to the visitor, they're about connecting to your community members who have left to travel to a town or to live overseas somewhere. They're about attracting doctors and teachers and other people that you want to have live in your community to come to your community and spend time there. This is not just about tourism development, it's about community development. It's about making tourism work for community as well as having community work for tourism. And we can see a presentation of a range of different vineyards and beaches, but the critical thing here that is being driven is meet our community, connect with our people, connect with our businesses, learn about our place and spend more money, increase yield. The final phase, and this is the last little section of the talk, the final phase takes things one step further. And for some communities, this is a phase that they very much want to engage with. This is about the community coming together to build their own online resources in a more formal way, to create a community-based and focused website from the bottom up. We use a technique called web raising. I'm not sure many of you are familiar with the old stories from the US. There was a book called Little House on the Prairie, which used to be on television. It's a popular book. And people in these Western communities in the United States, when a new family would arrive, everyone would come together and build a barn. That barn was a collective resource for the community. We see this as the same thing. The website is a collective resource for the community. And the process of building the site, of getting different community members to come together and to understand how they connect, is every bit as important as the final site that is produced. So the process of getting people together and to think about the resources that they think should be on that website is part of this development process, it's part of the capacity building of community. So we get the community to work with local businesses and to derive a series of topics that can be part of that website. And those topics are not just about accommodation and places to go as a visitor. They are telling the story and they are creating the unique sense of place which makes this particular community different from others. It's all about trying to attract the authentic, seeking, interactive traveller. We work with local school children to actually develop podcasts and videos which can be then of interest to the families that come to this area who have got their own children travelling with them. We often forget the important role that children play in this process. And in the process, we're actually building the capacity of local communities to use information technology. Much of the funding for this work does not come from tourism destination organisations or from tourism marketing funds. They actually come from strategies that are designed to increase the uptake of digital technology and IT skills among rural and urban communities. Tourism represents the hook to engage communities with the use of technology. So we're building the capacity of communities to use technology and to interact with the visitor. And that, in the long term, I believe, is what can increase yield over time. So in the end, what we have are sites that are characterised by authentic community content. They are built from the bottom up, and that's what really, I believe, the authenticity-seeking visitor, the interactive traveller, is looking for, and that's what can drive increased interaction. This is just one of the examples of a web-raised site from Western Southland. Each community within that region has a chance to tell its story and to focus on the everyday events which are going to be of interest to the visitor. And what we really, I think, understand now in tourism is that it's your or our everyday life that is actually the visitor experience. It's not packaging and developing new things that we think the visitor will like. It's about taking what we already have and sharing that with the visitor. It's about the interactive community interacting with the interactive visitor. Each business and each community has a chance to develop its own micro trails and to use the small data that is being collected from surveys and other tools to make better decisions and to put forward to the visitor the little micro opportunities that exist to spend a few more hours in the community and to spend a little bit more money. And just like it can attract people to certain areas and bring certain opportunities for more spend, communities can also tell the visitors where they would rather they didn't go. And they would tell the visitors about the things they would like the visitors to treat with some respect, to help sustain resources in that local area, to reduce some of those tensions that can sometimes arise between host and guest. We're also able, as I mentioned, to create podcasts and videos which we can then run through smartphones, etc. And as people travel around a community or around a region, they can connect to the stories, the videos and the podcasts to make those places come alive. In the same way that a picture comes alive in a museum when you've got a set of headphones on and you can listen to that. That's what we're trying to achieve here. But we're trying to give the community the capacity to do that and to build those skills. This is just one person that's part of one of the communities we're working with. She'd never used computers, she'd never done a podcast before. She's learnt those skills over time. She's told the story in a podcast about some of the bakery that she does in her cafe and how she uses some of the recipes that have been passed down to her by her grandparents. She's telling a story that the visitor can relate to, and she rang us a couple of days after her first podcast was put onto the site to say, I've had a visitor, they've come from Australia. They'd seen a video and they'd heard my podcast. They've come into the cafe to taste my grandmother's recipes, and now they're spending some time walking through the community. They may have only spent an extra few dollars. They may have only spent an extra few minutes, but it's that little bit of extra spending that creates the yield that in the long run leads to a more successful and sustainable tourism industry. So I think just to conclude, what I would like to drive home is that national and regional branding and marketing is obviously vital. New Zealand has done a great job in branding and marketing itself as 100% pure. But that hasn't led to increased visitor yield. The only way I believe we're going to sustain an increase in visitor yield is to build content and information and marketing material from the bottom up. Interactive tourists require interactive communities. Local stories and knowledge are what will in the long term enhance competitiveness and build a sense of place. That is what underlies yield. Local data, small data, is just as important at the local scale as the large data. And we can't forget that. I know there's a big focus on big data, and it's justified and fully understandable, but we've got to understand how that translates to the local scale and how we can build decision support systems for local people. So I firmly believe that information and communication technology can help to build more sustainable tourism development at the community level. But that if we're going to build yield in the long term, we have to build the capacity of community to interact as well as the capacity for tourists to interact. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simon, for your inspiring words and for this complete definition of responsible tourism. Ahora es el momento para la sala. Estamos a disposición para que tanto Simon como Julian puedan responder a sus preguntas. Sí. Sí, okay.
Hi, my name is Nuria. I'm from Fun Trip for All, that they're creating local experiences accessible for everyone. So my question is that we had another presentation before about robots, and they say that New Zealand is using drones with tourism and creating experiences and videos. So if you can tell us something about this. And another question is that I saw on YouTube that there are influencers like the British YouTuber, it's called Fun for Louis, that they are telling their life and traveling around the world, and recently they went to New Zealand. So if you notice about that, and if you are using as a marketing strategy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure I fully understood your last question, but I'll do my best to respond. Certainly, New Zealand is at the forefront in using drones. We have very liberal legislation about the use of drones, so people fly them all over the place. I guess for me, the key message is that technology, robots, drones, all of those things are very powerful tools to enhance the kinds of things that I've been talking about here. I don't think that you can sort of say technology and robots sit over here and community sits here. The two connect very much together. And in fact, we are very interested in particular in the way in which drones can help us also understand some of the tensions and pressures that come from tourism in terms of helping to map out areas of conflict between community natural resource use and visitor natural resource use. So drones are not just a marketing tool and a tourism development tool, they can also be a very powerful tourism management tool as well. I'm not sure I understood your second question about the group coming from England. Can you maybe just clarify that?
It's a YouTuber that I follow that it's a British one. It's called Fun for Louis. And they travel around the world and they post on YouTube their experiences and they interact with local communities, they travel, they live experiences, and they share with their community and their followers.
Yes.
So if you're using this?
Well, I think New Zealand has been for some time at the forefront of trying to use this kind of user-generated content through videos and other tools to spread the message of what we do. One of the really interesting areas in New Zealand is that, as you know, we're an agricultural economy. We have a lot of what we call woofers, or willing workers on farms who travel around, and there have been attempts, I know, in recent times to collect the individual stories through videos and other things of those individual woofers about the experience that they have had. So absolutely, I think we see, and we've been at the forefront, I believe, as a nation, in seeing that every visitor that comes to us is an ambassador. The stronger experience they have and the better experience they have, the more they're going to share that with others. So it's absolutely critical for us.
Sí.
Yes, it's also for Simon. How does Australia fit into your strategy? Do you see it as a competitor, or do you have plans to collaborate with Australia?
That's a very good question. I think we always see Australia as a competitor when we're playing rugby and sport. But when it comes to tourism, we do work quite closely. Our research over the years has shown that Australia is actually not so much of a competitor as something that we can add on to our New Zealand experience. For example, there was work done many years ago which actually asked people to think about the colour that most summed up New Zealand and Australia. New Zealand, that colour is blue or green. In Australia, it's red or brown. It's a drier environment. In many ways, I think our competitors are Chile, British Columbia and Canada. I think Australia is actually a place that we need to be linking more closely to in terms of our strategies. There's no question, though, that the Australian market is the dominant market for us. More than 60% of our visitors come from Australia. They have played a very important role in helping us through some of the crises that we faced as our long-haul markets decreased, as the financial crisis hit Europe and North America, for example. Our big challenge right now, and why so much of this work I've just been talking about is important, is that the Australian economy now is starting to move into a crisis. It's actually slowing down. That could have a major impact for us. Our New Zealand dollar now is on a par with the Australian dollar. So we have to look at ways to get more money out of each Australian visitor that comes to New Zealand. So yeah, we try and work closely. We certainly collaborate. We certainly have a degree of competition there, but I think actually we have much more to gain from co-opetition than competition.
Hi, my name is Anina Binder. I'm working in a consulting company, and I really liked your whole concept of increasing yields with the community, the concept. And I have two comments. One was that your second most visitor is Chinese, and I think it's a really good idea to increase this community sustainability concept and not increasing the number of Chinese tourists. And I think it is a long-term strategy, because at the moment I don't think there are a lot of independent travelers that come from China yet. But maybe in a long term they are coming. I don't know if you did some research on what Chinese travelers are coming and so on. And the second comment is that I think it's really interesting for Catalonia as well, as the tourism is quite centered in Barcelona, and they want to get the tourists out to different places in Catalonia. Yeah. So it's exactly what you are doing at the moment, this community.
Well, can I just make a couple of comments? Those are very interesting statements. I would have loved to have shown you more. The Chinese issue is a very important one, Part of our strategy is to encourage the free and independent Chinese traveller. And I remember when our strategy was released just a year and a half ago, I was sitting in the audience when the presenter was saying one of our strategies is to make it easier for Chinese to drive cars in our country. My initial concern was, well, what does that mean for our roads and for our communities? I'm not saying all Chinese are bad drivers, that's not the case. But the bottom line is that they are coming from a country and a system of driving which is very different to our own. And I'm afraid to say that that has now become a major problem. In the last few months, we have seen a really dramatic increase in the number of car accidents that have involved Chinese tourists. And we have actually had in recent times a problem of local people stopping Chinese drivers while not on the side of the road and taking the keys from them. And this has made international news and has become a big issue now within the country. So it comes back to what I was saying earlier. We have this great idea about having a free and independent and more interactive Chinese tourist, but we are not preparing the communities for that first. And we're putting the cart before the horse. We have to make sure if we have any strategy to create a more interactive Chinese visitor, that we think first of all about the community and how they are going to interact. It's about Chinese signage, it's about understanding Chinese culture. We don't know that very well, and so this is a big area, and right now we're kind of retroactively trying to deal with these problems. As far as Barcelona goes, it's really interesting. I'm very privileged at the moment to have a PhD student from Barcelona. She's working with me in New Zealand. Her interest is linking tourism, food and community development through information technology, and she's going to use for her PhD a case study from Auckland and also a case study from just outside Barcelona. I'm hoping through that we have more opportunities to build links and understanding, because I think we share some very similar challenges. And at the heart of those challenges really are, how do we help communities better engage with tourism? Because in the long run, that's what creates the broader economic benefit that we're all hoping to achieve. So I think Marta comes back here in June to start her PhD, and I'm sure she'll have a chance to meet many of you along the way.
Okay, la última pregunta.
Hello, my name is Carlos from Fantastic Transmedia. This is a question for Simon. Thank you very much for your presentation and the approach you made about communities. One question, because building communities is a process, okay, and it takes time. I can believe that initially can be an approach to be kind of volunteers that bring to the community, but in the long run, what kind of reward do you think has to be given to them? It's a kind of money or, well, your opinion, please.
Yes, that's a good question, and in fact I missed at the very end there a slide because I was running out of time that actually addressed that question to some extent. Let me answer this in a few ways. The first is that yes, this is not a short-term process. Many of the programs that we're talking about here have been taking a decade to come to play. And I would be wrong to give you the impression that everything works. We have had many cases where we have worked successfully for a few years with communities and things have not been sustained over time. Things have actually collapsed. We learn from mistakes, and I think one of the key things that we've learned is when we talk about community, we also mean business. And one of the first things that we now try and focus on is the fact that there are local businesses who are also community members. But very often those local businesses have got the strongest vested interest in making a new website or building that opportunity to increase visitor yield. So if we can somehow connect their motive for profit with their community-based motive for an improved quality of life, we start to have some very strong champions that can help to move this forward. In the long term, the best reward is increased jobs, increased income, and better opportunities for young people to remain and work in these communities. That's really the reward that we have to try and generate. And the only way that we can show that that is happening is through small data. We don't have that kind of information available through the big data sets that we have, but if we can do the kind of research that I was talking about, that helps communities measure their own progress to the goals that they are trying to meet. And that's really the best reward possible. And I think what I should say is when I talk about conducting a survey, I don't mean something that's done once. What I'm talking about is a barometer of change over time. And we can find ways to collect data very cost effectively through tools like crowdsourcing to get all of the community involved in that process. And over time, what we are able to then achieve is a barometer that measures change over time. And in that case of Western Southland, we've certainly seen very good examples of increased visitor spend, increased stay, but more importantly, lots of good examples of improved networking within communities, businesses working together, schools and other groups actually realising that they're part of that tourism mix. And we need small data to help us measure that, and that has to integrate and link to the big data that we've been talking about as well. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, just two conclusions. One, first of all, talking about Itb Berlin Convention as a good platform for travel industry transformation and for smart destinations reflection in three ways: disruptive technologies, sharing economy, and new distribution channels. On the other hand, talking about the speech of Mr. Simon, just few ideas. You have explained a lot of things, but it's important to have this conclusion with just three ideas. One, local content and local data to develop a general and national policy, interactive communities to support interactive tourists, local stories and knowledge enhance yield, and information and communication technologies as a tool to create a more sustainable tourism model. I think it's a really good and interesting and inspiring reflection, this opportunity today. Y solamente una última reflexión, es música para los oídos escuchar cómo desde el otro extremo del planeta se conviene en que el modelo de turismo responsable solo tendremos smart destinations, solo tendremos turismo en el futuro si tenemos turismo responsable. Y ahí hemos coincidido, tanto Simon como ha coincidido también la visión de Julian en su reflexión a través de la ITB, y estamos coincidiendo en general la mayoría de destinos turísticos del mundo, con lo cual complace saber que de hecho estamos trabajando en la misma línea. Solamente hay que seguir, continuar y perseverar. Muchas gracias. Ahora tenemos una comida que está abierta a todo el mundo aquí en los patios modernistas, en la zona modernista de Casa Ramón, arriba, y después a las 3 nos encontramos aquí de nuevo. Gracias.